Hello and welcome. The title of the message today is A Time for Everything. But let's begin by affirming together our opening statement. There is only one presence and one power in my life and the universe, God. I invite you now just to take a deep breath with me and release that air back to universe, relaxing your body and bringing your attention to this present time. And so it is. The title of the message is A Time for Everything. You may recognize those words, and I'd like to read the scripture where those words come from to you now. This is in the book of Ecclesiastes, which translated from the Aramaic means the preacher. And I'll be reading from the George Lamsa translation from the Aramaic scriptures, chapter 3, and starting at verse 1. To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under the sun. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. You may have heard these verses before. They're very famous. I can think of a song by the Byrds. To everything, turn, turn, there is a season. And yes, they are popular, and it's a beautiful poem. In fact, I almost read from the King James just to get more of that poetic essence. But I think Lamsa does a very nice job with it as well. But what is the meaning of these verses? And when I say that, I mean, what does it say about our inner life, about our spiritual path, about our opportunity to grow into being the most perfect human being that we can possibly be? I want to point out that each one of these verses brings in an idea and then its opposite. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. These opposites are not separate things. To everything there is a time. And these opposites have no meaning without the other end. In fact, it's very much like a stick. There would be no stick if it didn't have two ends. A time to mourn and a time to to dance. I forget the verses. A time to lose and a time to seek. Both ends of the stick. A time to love and a time to hate. When I look inside myself and I look for opposites in myself. A time to laugh. A time to weep. I can see these range of emotions in me. And what do they have in common with the stick? You see, as we pass from one opposite to the other, we must go through the center of the stick. I want to use another analogy to help see this. This is the pendulum. So I've made myself a little pendulum here out of a pin. And whenever I am at this time of love and I have the opposite, hate, it swings from love to hate. And if you notice that it swings pretty fast as it goes through the center. And it pauses at each end. Even if it's just for a short time, the speed of it always goes to 0 at the ends. But if it ever comes to rest, it always rests in the center. But that center might be difficult to find because it passes by so rapidly. As the pendulum swings, it's at its fastest movement when it's at the center. So what does that mean for us? As our emotions swing from happiness to sadness, there is a place in the middle. But it passes by so fast that it can be difficult to see. But I ask you to take the opportunities that come with each of these swings to eventually find what is in the middle. Because every time there is a swing from one to the other, there is an opportunity to find the balance that is at the center. There is a balance at the center of every one of these opposites. I'm reminded of a joke. There was a theology professor who was teaching at a rural college in Oklahoma. And he asked his students at the beginning of class, what is the opposite of happiness? And one of the students replied, it is sadness. And then the professor said, well, what is the opposite of depression? And one of the students replied, why, it is elation. He says, very good. I'd like to ask you now, what is the opposite of woe? And one of the students in the back stood up. It was a cowboy, because they still have cowboys in Oklahoma. And he said, well, I reckon that would be giddy up, mister. So we have this point in the middle between woe and giddy up, where there is a balance, where we're and that's where we want to ride. We want to ride at the balance. We each have to find that balance for ourselves. We can live at one end of the stick, but as soon as we get to happiness, immediately there is this pause, and the force is the greatest of movement when we come to that pause, and it brings us right back through the center to the end of that stick. But if we ever want to find an equilibrium, it is always going to be in the center, at the balance. In spiritual circles, we talk about finding the center, being centered. When we are in Ruah self, when we are demonstrating Ruah nature, we are always at a center. When we are in Napsha, we are removed from the center, and so we are in this motion. So think about the stick. As you go through your daily activities, as you are watching, paying attention to your inner self, noticing your thought patterns. When am I in this swing? When have I reached one end of the stick and begun to turn back to the next end of the stick? And can I find that center? Can I take a deep breath when I am in this motion? Can I affirm truth in this moment? Can I deny that this swing is who I really am and that I really am this still center? When I am in the midst of life, is it possible? And it is possible. It may not be easy when the swing is violent because, like I said, it is when we pass the center that we are on the greatest velocity. But it is the only place where we may find balance. The force of movement is greatest when we are at each end of the stick, pulling us back to the center. But the momentum of the movement draws us back to the next opposite. And we find ourselves then in this constant motion. And that is what is the turbulence of life. But we can find the calm center, the balance point. When we are at the balance point, we are aligned with the divine. We are Ruah. We are Nafsha at either end. And yes, it can be very easy to stay at these ends because we become identified. We become attached to what goes on here or here. But we can let go of those attachments. We can create new channels in our neural network that are around the center. We do it by denying the channels that bring us to these extreme opposites and affirming that we are that centered balance. We are, in our true nature, that soul. We are that essence. We are that still point that can only be found in the center. And it does pass by very quickly unless we can find a way to the stillness. I invite you to watch your inner experience, to find those opposites, and then use this knowledge to find the still center. I'd like for us to close with our prayer for protection. It is a powerful tool to help us find that center in the middle of the constant change that is life. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever I am, God is. Thank you.